April 19th, 1993 is a day forever etched in Texas memory. It started with a raid and ended in death and fire. For the next 51 days, fear, paranoia, and chaos reigned inside a doomsday cult. This is the nightmare of Waco. But was this really a battle against a dangerous cult, or a government experiment in excessive force gone horribly wrong? In the first quarter of 1993, an obscure religious sect living outside Waco, Texas, was about to come under the spotlight of national attention and become entangled in what would go down as one of the most controversial law enforcement operations in U.S. history. They called themselves the Branch Davidians and were a remnant of the Shepherd's Rod movement of Davidian Adventists. Their history dates back to the 1930s, when the original Davidians broke away from the main body of the Seventh-day Adventist Church to follow the teachings of Bulgarian immigrant Victor Hautef. By 1993, they were led by David Koresh, a charismatic and fanatical preacher who claimed to be the Messiah. Under his lead, the cult stockpiled guns and food at their Mount Carmel compound in preparation for an expected period of persecution that they were expected to face shortly before the prophesied apocalypse they firmly believed was near. Formerly Vernon Howell, David Koresh gained control of the group in 1987 and became an unquestionable figure of authority in Mount Carmel. Under the banner of spiritual wives, Koresh proclaimed that every woman in the community belonged to him and did not even spare the wives and underage daughters of his followers. History would ask, how did so many intelligent adults surrender their families and their children to one man's twisted vision? On February 28, 1993, the ATF made a surprise move on the Branch Davidians to serve arrest and search warrants for illegal weapons. But things didn't go as planned. When the ATF arrived at 9:45 a.m., they discovered the Branch Davidians had already taken up defense positions around the compound. Gunfire erupted, and a deadly shootout ensued. The confrontation escalated into a violent bloodbath, resulting in significant casualties on both sides. The question of who first pulled the trigger remains, and conflicting accounts from both sides only cause more confusion. Federal authorities claimed that the Davidians ambushed them. At the same time, the Davidian survivors swore the government had opened fire without warning. The source of that first gunshot is still a mystery, and it transformed the scene into overwhelming violence. Conspiracy theorists say the government knows exactly who fired first, but buried the truth. The failed raid left devastation in its wake. 4 federal agents were dead, 6 Branch Davidians had been killed, and dozens more on both sides were wounded. What unfolded next was a 51-day standoff that shocked the world. What looked like a dusty ranch outside Waco would become the center stage for an apocalyptic confrontation, with live coverage being watched in living rooms across America. On full display was an uneasy balance between negotiation and force, faith and firepower, with no clear way out. After the February raid ended in catastrophic failure, the FBI stepped in, surrounding Mount Carmel with armored vehicles and agents armed to the teeth. What was meant to be a swift operation would later become a tragedy broadcast to the world. David Koresh suffered a severe gunshot wound during the initial raid, but his injury did not diminish his resolve. Koresh convinced the Branch Davidians that the assault was proof of his prophecies being fulfilled, and that the corrupt outside world, which he called Babylon, had come to destroy them. As the standoff continued, Koresh and his closest associates negotiated delays with the federal agents. Koresh's defiance in the face of death transformed the Branch Davidians' fear into fanatic resolve, and so it became increasingly unlikely that the standoff was to end quickly or peacefully. Despite the negotiators' repeated pleas for Koresh and his followers to surrender, the Davidians remained unshaken in their belief that they were facing the apocalyptic showdown prophesied in their scripture. For the Branch Davidians, the battle was far from over. Over the next several weeks, the standoff with law enforcement was a fragile balance of negotiation and delay. At one point, the FBI persuaded Koresh to release 35 people, mostly children. This brought a momentary relief and renewed hope that this operation would resolve successfully. Then, on April 14, 1993, the FBI received a letter from Koresh that sparked increasing tension. In his letter, Koresh said that if he were allowed to complete his manuscript on the 7 seals of the Book of Revelation, he and his followers would surrender. This promise was met with skepticism, as the FBI suspected Koresh was trying to buy time for preparations for his inevitable and prophesied holy war. Viewers across the globe could feel the dread of an impending disaster through their TV screens. Outside the camp, efforts to intimidate and wear down the Davidians went on, but the patience of the federal authorities began to wane. Opinions were divided between experienced negotiators and tactical teams. While the negotiators wanted to de-escalate the standoff through dialogue, the tactical teams had gotten restless and pushed for decisive force instead. Pressure mounted with each passing day among the federal authorities as the standoff transformed into a battle of wills. Seeing that negotiations were bearing no results, the FBI switched to psychological warfare tactics to wear down the resolve of the Davidians. They cut off power to the compound before blasting loud recordings ranging from blaring music and alarm sounds to Tibetan chants. The FBI also cast bright floodlights at the compounds both day and night, while aggressively patrolling the perimeter of the compound. The unrelenting barrage of psychological attacks began to seriously affect the Davidians as sleep deprivation, stress, and paranoia began to take hold. Meanwhile, inside Mount Carmel, things were becoming more desperate. The lack of power and water was taking its toll on the Branch Davidians. Children cried, begging to return to the life they left several weeks before. The adults, on the other hand, held on to their weapons, prepared to die rather than surrender. Rather than working as planned, the tactics backfired, strengthening the Davidians' belief in Koresh's message. To the Davidians, things were unfolding just as Koresh had prophesied, and this made them even more resolute in their decision not to surrender to the FBI. The world watched as the Davidians got entangled in a web of fear and faith that seemed to bind them even closer to Koresh's apocalyptic vision. The world kept watching as the agents pressured the Davidians' resolve. Still, one question weighed on the minds of many people. What was even happening inside the compound during these long, sleepless nights? That unanswered question kept viewers hooked. What was the breaking point for those trapped inside? And could anything have been done to pierce the cycle of torment and devotion before it was too late? After 51 grueling days, all signs that negotiations would yield any results and hopes for a peaceful surrender had faded completely. Now prepared for the possibility that David Koresh might never make it out of Mount Carmel alive, the FBI made a decision to storm the compound and force the Branch Davidians out. Would taking action amount to a rescue mission or a death sentence? At the first light of dawn on April 19, 1993, agents kick-started the operation to forcefully evacuate the Davidians. Armored tanks rammed into the compound walls, followed by a barrage of tear gas inserted through the punctured walls. Later that morning, agents drove the armored vehicles into the building entrances in an effort to push tear gas further in and avoid any human casualties. But things spiraled quickly as some Davidians opened fire, sparking another heated confrontation. It was a chaotic scene. The air was filled with tear gas as a hail of bullets rained down. This heated exchange continued into midday when, without warning, flames erupted inside Mount Carmel. In moments, Mount Carmel was covered in a sea of fire, spreading at an alarming speed. The fire sealed the fates of almost every Davidian inside Mount Carmel. Only 9 lives were spared, and more than 70 men, women, and children were trapped in the flames. Most died from the blaze, while others died from gunshots fired in the desperate final moments. As the fire eventually flamed out, the true horror it concealed was revealed. Amid the charred ruins of Mount Carmel, investigators at the scene identified the body of David Koresh. The Branch Davidian leader did not die in the blaze, but from a gunshot wound to the head. Around him were the bodies of many other Davidians. For many onlookers and surviving federal agents, it was an unbearable sight to behold. Knowledge of many children and adults perishing in the fire in the compound before them left several in anguish. What started as an operation to seize illegal weapons turned into utter tragedy. In the aftermath, Americans' shock gave way to public outrage. Many believed the FBI never needed to take things so far and that the tragedy could have been avoided. Amidst the public's outburst, Attorney General Janet Reno spoke to the press and defended the FBI's actions. As a harsh reminder of what transpired at Mount Carmel, the footage of the burning compound was broadcast every night throughout America, standing as a symbol of government failure and religious extremism. And suspicion mounted as viewers asked, who lit the fire? Survivors claim the government torched the building. Officials insist the Davidians set it themselves. The truth is, as charred and undetermined today as it was on that day outside of Waco, 76 Branch Davidians, 25 of whom were children, lost their lives in the tragedy. Koresh's apocalyptic vision, shunned by many in the outside world, became a shocking reality that sent waves throughout America. The sight of the charred bodies that were recovered from the ruins will always be remembered by Americans who saw it all happen. Later accounts from survivors hint at silent prayers, tears, and intense debates between those inside Mount Carmel who wanted to surrender and those who remained adamant in their belief in Koresh's vision. But what really went on behind the walls of Mount Carmel will always be a mystery. What really happened inside the compound as the fire raged? Were the deaths of those Branch Davidians their choice, by force, or by fire? Was it the government's psychological tactics or Koresh's actions that led to the fulfillment of his doomsday prophecy? 51 days of siege, a final hour of fire. At Waco, fear and faith collided with deadly consequences. The fallout of this tragedy sparked a massive anti-government movement and radicalized numerous extremists, even as the standoff demonstrated to the world how mistrust and fanaticism can lead to catastrophe. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up.